Hi, I'm Angela Fehr. This is the second in a series of 5 videos on basic techniques in watercolor. In this video, we're going to be exploring the wet and wet technique on a full sheet of paper. You can use the card in the corner of the video to skip to the next section or to link up to my website where I have lots of other tutorials on how to paint in watercolor. Now the first technique we're going to do is actually on our pansies here, and we're going to do wet on wet, and that's probably a term you've heard before if you've done any watercolor painting at all or heard talk about watercolor painting. You hear artists talking about painting wet on wet. So we're going to show you what that looks like. And we're going to start by just wetting our whole paper. That's the on wet part. Wet on wet simply means you're painting with wet paint on wet paper. And that's going to give us a very soft and diffused look. This is a technique that you want to think of as belonging in the early part of your painting stage. So if you're planning to do some wet and wet painting, we generally do it first. And what my plan here is that I'm going to take my wet and wet and use it to give me a foundation for my pansy painting. That means I'm not going to paint every detail, and I'll show you why. I can take some green gold here, and I want to paint one of these leaves, but because my paper is shiny moist, that color is going to bleed and flow, and it's not going to really stay where I put it. It wants to follow the water, and because the water is everywhere, that means that color could be going just everywhere. So now I'm getting a combination of the green gold and some sap green, which are two really nice kind of foundational greens to have. And right away you can see that color is moving. It's following the water. And a great way to think of this is water equals movement. So the wetter you're painting, the wetter your paper, the more your color is going to move. And the color is going to follow the water, which means that if I tilt my painting board, which is why I have my paper on a board, that color is going to start to flow downward a little bit more, and I can control where it goes just a little bit more. And I love wet and wet for creating vibrant fluid effects. You can see how soft that color is as it flows. Notice as well that I am keeping a very light touch. I'm not pushing the color around. The water is doing that for me. So I don't have to move my colors at this stage. I can let the water move it for me. Now here I have my pansies, and I'm thinking of a purple and yellow color scheme. So we're going to start with maybe some lemon yellow in the center of that pansy, and maybe in the center of that pansy, and maybe this whole pansy is going to be yellow. Because this is a foundational technique, I'm also thinking of my colors as wanting them to stay fairly light. And now I'm going to grab some violet. This is dioxazine violet. And I'm going to place that where I approximately want my pansies to be. And right away you get some movement. We're starting to see that color just bleed and flow. And I should note at this stage that if your color doesn't move the same way as mine, if you kind of place it on the paper and it just sits there, there's two factors that could be occurring. One is that you might be just not moist enough. Make sure your paper start out with it shiny wet, and when you wet it down the first time, sometimes that moisture gets absorbed really quickly. Some of that depends on your climate. And so if it's absorbed really quickly, sometimes that means you need to put a second layer of moisture on. And the other factor that could be preventing things from flowing and moving the way I've mentioned here is poor quality paper. And I've really found that a student grade paper, generally it's a paper that's not 100% cotton. It's got more sizing, so it has kind of a slick or shiny feel to it. Or it's machine made. It has a very definite kind of weave that you can see a real pattern in it, rather than a weave that's just a little bit more natural. Those are all indications that it's a student grade paper. The paint just doesn't want to move on a student grade paper as it does on an artist quality paper. So I really recommend buying the best paper you can afford. Really get used to how good paper feels and tailor your painting techniques to quality paper. Now this is my wet and wet beginning of my painting. I can't paint details at this stage. When things are all moist and soft, as you know, no matter how much detail I try to put in, it's not going to stay where it's put. It's going to follow that water and flow. So I need to let everything dry before I add details. I kept the colors light, I kept my pencil marks light so that I can adapt my plan based on how the color moves. This technique showcases the beautiful fluid qualities of watercolor. Where the colors touch each other and mix together, you get some beautiful transitions. And it's really quite subtle in this painting, but as you get to know wet and wet techniques, you can really start to push it and exaggerate it and create some amazing contrasts. What you can't do is control it very well. So we keep the color light, we keep things fairly loose and ambiguous, and then we plan to tighten up, darken up, and add detail in the future layers. And I'll show you how to do that. By liking this video and subscribing to my YouTube channel, you're helping me to grow my channel, which makes it easier for me to create great videos for you, to give you content that you're going to use in your watercolor journey. If this video was helpful to you, or if you have questions or comments or things you'd like to see, feel free to leave those in the comments below. I'm Angela Fehr. Happy painting.